Hi everybody, my name is Kunny Berdow and I will be presenting gaming trends and data as part of the DataCon conference. I'm super excited to do this because I'm super passionate about gaming and the first time I attended DataCon, as I was mentioning to Sebash, was 3 or 4 years ago, and I was incredibly inspired by the people around me as well as the speakers and the event. So I'm extremely happy to be part of it this time and to share some of these learnings with you. Um, Please leave your questions to the end. Feel free to also add me on LinkedIn, or if you wanted to connect or have questions, feel free to do so as well. But these thoughts are my thoughts alone, and they're reflective of some of the strategies that I've employed not only at Google but some of my other roles as I was working kind of in the industry and in gaming. So let's get started. Hopefully you guys can see my screen and everything is working properly. I'll just go on present mode. So I guess I'll start off by telling you guys a little bit about me. I was born in China. I grew up in the UK and spent most of my life in Canada, so I'm a Canadian. I started my career in marketing, in brand management, and then slowly went into analytics. So I made a transition, and now I specialize more in consumer analytics and product analytics because it kind of ultimately you're speaking to the consumer, and that's kind of an area of passion for me. Some roles I've held before. One of the best jobs to this day was working in marketing for Lynch Chocolate in Berdow because there was a cold fridge and you can have as much chocolate as you want. My first job, going back a little bit further, was selling ornaments at a department store when I was in high school. So that was always interesting and very festive. My role here today at Google is working on our Stadia platform, in global insights. And prior to this, I was working on the ads slide of business, working as a principal analytical lead. So we helped kind of the industry, the gaming industries more specifically, solve some of the measurement problems from a deep digital media perspective. So that's a bit of background on me. The agenda today. The first half, or it'll be broken down into two main sections. The first section will be talking about the pandemic and some of the industry trends that resulted one of the biggest kind of more, most pervasive events that we've ever had in the history of the world. You know, I yeah, I'll go into some details around how that's affected entertainment, how that's affected gaming, but it's just a fascinating kind of event that will continue to cause ripple effects in kind of how we consume entertainment in the next 5 to 10 years, and the results are to be seen. But I'll provide a point of view on some of the existing trends we're seeing. And then the last part of the presentation will be around methods and some of the useful kind of tools and framework that I've used in the past to look at, not only media analysis and conversion analytics, but also segmentation, which I'm sure some of you guys will be able to apply in other areas beyond just marketing and gaming. So let's start with industry trends. This slide surprises a lot of people that are not in gaming because it showcases just how quickly gaming is growing in terms of revenue and kind of the players involved and the user base. A lot of this growth is driven by mobile gaming, which I will get into a little bit further, but relative to both movies and music. And I think the legend is actually covered by my camera, so I'm not sure if I can move this. Oh, there you go. So it's driven by mostly mobile gaming, and you can see it's almost double the size of film and music combined. Um, this is huge because as kind of non-US markets in South America, APAC, and the Middle East continue to grow technologies like 5G. Mobile gaming is going to continue to be kind of the engine of that growth, partially because, you know, just the movie industry is very kind of US centric currently. And also, you know, with gaming, it's universal. Like games like Arena of Valor have made a huge splash outside of places like China. You know, Candy Crush, Supercell's Clash of Clans, and other kind of APAC developers like Arena Free Fire. All of them have, you know, been able to build games that transcend different languages and cultures. And everybody has a mobile phone, and not everyone necessarily has a TV to themselves, because oftentimes you're watching TV with the family. So in terms of time spent, gaming continues to be huge and continues to grow. You know, this was an interesting event, the Travis Scott concert. I'm not sure how many of you guys were able to tune into that, but I think it's an incredible example of the cross-pollination of different industries, different types of entertainment. You know, Travis Scott is a hip-hop artist, and in the past, you would never see this type of partnership. Obviously, there is an overlap between kind of his audience as well as those who play Fortnite, from the sense that people are young, technology savvy, and demographically there are similarities. And in terms of interest, he, you know, participated in a Discord stream with Ninja and Drake, and with Juju Smith-Schuster, you know, this last year. So I think building that audience and building that partnership was really smart for them. 1.2 billion downloads during the COVID time period. I would say that that's also, you know, really, really big number and broke records. We found that not necessarily everybody played every game they downloaded, but the experience of being able to go through a catalog and decide which games you played or able to play, kind of illustrated an opportunity from diversity of entertainment choices and enjoying kind of different types of entertainment during a time where you're stuck at home. This is another example of a company that has, you know, merged, blurred lines between gaming and entertainment and streaming. The Witcher, you know, is a huge IP that was started by CDP, who's also making Cyberpunk that's coming out in November. And, you know, Witcher 3 is one of my favorite games. I actually just finished it not too long ago. But there's a movie, or it's actually a TV series. Season 2 is coming out soon. So you can see the biggest IPs in gaming are just, you know, becoming the biggest IPs in general. I'm sure there's a soundtrack attached to it. There's a community. There's a Gwent community, which is a mini game within The Witcher. Castlevania, Devil May Cry as well. You see examples of Far Cry where, you know, there's an Amazon Prime kind of 40-minute mini movie that kind of goes into the storyline. But this idea of storytelling and narrative-driven kind of gaming is huge. The biggest one that's coming, pictured here, is Zelda, of course, one of the biggest games and biggest releases in the past 3 years with Nintendo. They released Mario and Zelda and a new console in the same year, and, you know, phenomenal game with a lot of interest. So people are excited about that. So this showcases roughly the breakout of which areas are growing. The emergence of that hyper-casual gamer that came out of the pandemic really showed kind of the changes in behavior. And I have kind of a separate talk on how subscription businesses and subscription business models in general are much more widely accepted today versus before. However, that changes kind of the dynamic of the relationship that you have with the consumer. Instead of this one and done transactional relationship, it's now much more of kind of a back and forth. And the cross-platform mobile gaming behavior, I think, MPD reported that there was an increase of 6% of people who are using multiple platforms during the pandemic because of this, phenomenon of being stuck inside. So people who used to just game on their console are now, including the mobile experience as well as the PC experience in how they think about gaming and where they spend their time. And the onset of streaming and gaming is also huge. Of course, Stadia being an example, and Series X with the Xbox as well, xCloud. Now you're able to pick up right where you left off from one platform to another. So the experience is much more seamless. And I think the subscription-based approach has the potential to unlock a ton of new technologies like VR. You're able to kind of meld the experiences and make that transition seamless. I think folks will be much more open to, and companies will be much more open to, investing in new types of content across different platforms because, you get that continued relationship as opposed to trying to make every release, a AAA top 10 game. So I think companies will be willing to take a lot more risks. So analysis in business application. Here I'll talk mostly about how kind of business decision making is how you can leverage analytics in business decision making. I think I saw a poll that some of the organizers sent out. I'm not sure if it was to everybody, but asking kind of what impedes good analysis or like data-driven decision making in an organization. I think oftentimes it is more cultural than the actual technology or any sort of limitations on technology, because in order for teams to adopt kind of the recommendations or continue to rely on analysis as an input to business decision making, like the team has to be very bought in, and the analysis have to be very aware of like the levers that the business unit can pull in order to kind of impact the business outcome. I think oftentimes at most places, like those two teams are very separate. So good coordination and good understanding of what each side does is critical in making, data-driven business decisions. Like you really do have to be integrated into the team, and the team has to be integrated in kind of the process of analysis and be aware of kind of the constraints of research as well. So why does that happen very broadly? I would say that based on how most organizations are structured, you have two main pillars. One is around the developers and like the people who create the content. So like studios, the engineers, the game engineers, the game engine developers, and then kind of the business units that have to do with understanding like market dynamics and externalities related to the environment in which the game is being created. So those are kind of the two big sections. Developers are concerned about making games, and the business units ultimately are concerned about selling the game and market viability. And the questions that come out of these two groups are very different, and the limitations that they have are very different. So in practice, theoretically, both should be marching towards the same ends, but in reality, there's a silo effect that comes into play when you're building research for these two groups. So developers are concerned with things like crash reports, for example. the game makers are concerned about matching. So oftentimes games today are multiplayer, and how do we match, the right level of difficulty or like expertise in these different types of matches when we're grouping people together and making sure that they all have an enjoyable experience. Wi-Fi connectivity when it comes to multiplayer player games. How can we make sure that we're getting the game in the right people's hands so they have a good experience when it comes to their gameplay. This is a big problem in game streaming services, that if they have bad bandwidth, there's that latency. So how can we make sure that like we have a good process in place to measure our player base, and how much is that driving into whether or not they're satisfied with their service. And the business unit is probably an area that I have the most experience in, which is around like market viability. First, before the game is made, how can we look at market sizing if this is the right thing to make in the first place? So that's the greenlighting process of a lot of different companies or publishers. Also, once the game is made, how can we ensure that people know about it and the right people know about it at the right time? There's a ton of data on conversion analysis, segmentation, are we targeting the right people, and how to optimize content around these different audiences. So in terms of business need, and in terms of what methods we use to analyze or answer these two business questions, or two sides kind of the studio and the publisher relationship, how can we best build our research or design our research to best address these concerns, because they're very different. And the type of data points you get from these two teams are very different as well. So I think I will go to the next slide before I explain this one, because I feel like it flows a little bit better. I probably should have even changed the order, but the types of data sets you often get from the business side is like qualitative types of data. So the demographics of an audience, you're either male or you're female, or you're gender non-binary, but that data set is not a quantitative data set, it's nominal. You get an age of a person, and that is again a qualitative data set where they live. Like all of these kind of demographic attributes feed into, oftentimes, even if it's motivational, actually, you can survey an audience and get, do a max-stiff or conjoint analysis, and the results of that are also kind of qual in nature. So there are limited types of methods you can use to segment or predict the conversion rate of a specific audience. Whereas with the business, not the business unit, with the studios and the developers, a lot of that data, I guess it's a bigger mix of the data, can be quantitative or continuous. When you're looking at session times and different types of crash reporting data points, when you're looking at telemetry and progression within a game, all of that is quantitative. So there are other methods that you can use relative to kind of the qualitative and more like business-driven types of data sets. When we talk about how we design a research project as it relates to answering a business question, let's hypothetically say that we're looking to assess the conversion rate of each demo, or different types of demographics. First we look at the business question. So oftentimes the marketer, you're working with marketing in this instance, will ask you, how can we predict which groups will more likely buy our product? So that's kind of the business question. That's not a research question, because there's so many, you can go into so many different directions when someone comes to you and wants to understand how people convert, or which groups are more likely to convert. You really have to distill that down into specific research questions or operationalize that into different variables. So for example, when we're looking at conversion for console games, the console purchase journey is very different from that of the mobile, kind of in the mobile world. There isn't closed loop attribution, meaning that somebody could watch a YouTube video and then they talk to their friends. They go to the store, they do some more research, read some reviews, and then they may go into a GameStop or a Walmart or a Best Buy and then buy the game. That disconnect between the talking to your friends or going into the store and then ultimately making that purchase and converting. There's so many disconnects between that journey versus a mobile game where typically it's free to play and somebody will click on an ad on Google or Facebook or one of the other kind of game exchanges on another app, for instance, and they will download the app right away. And that journey is much more measurable through some third-party sort of companies. But again, that's changing because of iOS 14. But again, it's much easier to measure that purchase journey, and it's a lower barrier because it's a free-to-play game versus typically a $60 game. So say we're looking at the former and looking to understand the purchase journey of somebody who makes a decision to buy a console game, you need to think about, okay, what exactly can we influence? There's so many directions you can go with the question. Do we want to understand the length, for example, of when they make that decision or start researching to that purchase, because it could be anywhere from 8 months to a week. Do we want to understand which news articles they've read? Do we want to understand which stores they go to? Because in order, you can't answer everything with one piece of research. You can answer very specific things. So, a research design around the length of time or how different groups, what is the lead time around how different groups make that decision to ultimately convert is a very different question from like understanding which news articles they read when they're online. There's not going to be one piece of research that's able to answer all of those different questions. And another popular question in gaming is around competitive titles that they consider. Do people think about just one game from the beginning and make that conversion to purchasing that game? Or are they oftentimes like comparing between 3 games or 6 games or whatever it may be? The answer is maybe sometimes, but breaking the research design down into defining which characteristics are more likely associated with what types of behavior is kind of the point. So the reason why I highlighted transitioning the business questions to the research questions is a key part of the process, and I think where a lot of things end up going wrong because researchers have the responsibility to go to the business units and push back on what things they can answer and what things they can't, and what this specific piece of research will do to kind of answer specific questions definitively and what it cannot be used for, because people will tend to extrapolate and make assumptions that the research outcomes don't support. So let's say we want to understand the competitive title question during a specific window when they're thinking about and researching about a specific game. We want to understand what competitive titles the specific gamer is thinking about, to go back to our marketers and say, this is what you're up against. This is how you need to adjust messaging, adjust your content, adjust your channels, because we're going up against Call of Duty and FIFA, for example, during that period where the person is considering like these other games. So that's kind of the indicated action, or those are the levers you can pull. And I think setting those expectations up front and making sure that research can plug into a business decision and an outcome that's actionable is critical. So that all kind of needs to happen in steps 1 to 2 when you're partnering with the organization that you're supporting. And then, research design can be a combination of qualitative techniques like surveys to working with, a specific group of people and recruiting, specific gamers and tracking kind of their behavior over time, with their consent, and by combining those two results, and then with qual, potentially IDIs, in-depth interviews to ask them, why did you do this, or why did you consider that, or what aspects of the games you felt were really similar, were they really different, and then go back and kind of analyze other attributes like demographics, and if that had an effect on how they made their different choices. Is it kind of geographical, for example? People in the Midwest are more likely to want to play, Red Dead Redemption because, from a historical, cultural, regional perspective, there's that kind of those narratives around like the lone soldier, lone wolf type of thing appeal to them. There are different reasons for things, but kind of getting those outcomes, measuring them, and then going back and seeing kind of what contributed to some of those patterns in the data that you've seen. Another part that I will spend a little bit more time on is the idea of socialization. So I probably should have spent more time on this piece in my previous roles. I've had the privilege of seeing it done really, really well. And my current kind of job here is a lot of emphasis on getting people to understand the outcomes and the findings and the implications, making sure that you get buy-in from kind of senior leadership as well as kind of folks who are more junior on the team, and making sure you plug in kind of everybody's thoughts and kind of constraints into the initial research. I think getting feedback along the way is really important, but the socialization piece means that you're maybe scheduling workshops, you're making sure the assets for kind of the research output is really exciting, you're excited about it, senior leaders are excited about it, they understand just how each piece plugs into each group, whether it's UXR or marketing or sales. So I think there are a lot of ways to really flesh out kind of the socialization piece and getting organizational buy-in that researchers need to consider much more beyond just kind of the collecting and analyzing, because that's where I see a lot of data scientists and analytical professionals focus on. But there's definitely more things that could go wrong on kind of the front end, and more effort can be put into the socialization and the activation and actionability of those insights for sure. So an example of a framework, and I think that there are other talks that actually go much more into detail here at DataCon on leveraging these methods, but oftentimes with kind of business unit data, I talked a little bit about that example I shared with how do we look at conversion rates for competitive games, or a measure of competitive games, and looking at kind of different characteristics, kind of demographic characteristics. Here's an example that I took from Statistical Services, because I like this visualization. It's very simple. It showcases what a chi-squared kind of tree based on the chi-squared methodology will output. So I think for a lot of folks looking back at how the boosted tree was built, they can understand, okay, it looks like being a homeowner was a significant has a significant impact on, whether or not that person responded. Therefore, we should focus our marketing efforts on that specific segment. It's easy to understand, whereas some of the other methodologies, like PCA, principal component analysis, are a little bit harder for people to go back and interpret. But so I always like to stick to kind of the simpler ones, and kind of related to the previous slide that I didn't spend a ton of time on. Most of the data sets that you'll be working with on the business unit side will be quantitative kind of data sets, and this method overwhelmingly is much more preferred when it comes to working with quantitative data versus regression or some of the other methods that you'll use that require a lot of data cleaning and data transformations, which again makes it much more difficult to explain to the business unit. Clustering, I think, is another really kind of simple, easy to understand method for a lot of different researchers. I really enjoyed this particular example or this kind of articulation because it showcases very distinct groups depending on whether you're using pre-means, which is looking at kind of the different centers of how you built those trees or where you trimmed them. It will spit out relatively the same kind of output. However, in real life data, very rarely you'll have kind of a Mickey Mouse looking clean clusters or clean 3 distinct clusters, and you'll be oftentimes explaining kind of the center of these clusters versus like the overlap. So I think part of the education is helping your team understand that you will be explaining kind of the center of these circles rather than kind of the overlap. So clustering is also useful to understand once you've built your audiences and you apply your name or you built kind of your preferred target group, how different are these different targets, and helping visualize that. So this is another method that you can use to help answer some of those key business questions on actually both sides, because it's very, very flexible and easy to understand. So that is all for my presentation. Happy to, again, answer any questions you guys might have. But I hope what you got out of this was just understanding kind of the relationship between really, really, asking or transitioning the business question into the research question and making sure that you're focused on areas that you can action against with the business unit, and that takes a lot of collaboration and strong partnership. So thank you.